I'm going to reveal just some of the materials and books, periodicals, and documents that I've collected over the years that nobody else has. First, I want to clarify this idea of snake venom being in vaccines. You can Google or search Brazil snake farms, and it will tell you that they have been using snake venom in vaccines since 1900. And it's like a resort in Brazil, like a museum where people come and look at the snakes and they sell souvenirs and stuff. They have 400 of the most poisonous snakes in the world. And it tells you again that they've been using it since 1900. Just want to clarify that. Now I'm going to start with unraveling the polio fraud of the 1950s. This was one of the first books I got, The Great Salk Vaccine Fiasco, written in 1960 by a Dr. Ernest Ziesler from Chicago. I'm not going to go through this because I got another one coming up in 1962 that I'll tell you the subtitles of it because I'm not going to read all this stuff to you. It'd take me 6 months. This is the Encyclopedia of Common Diseases by J.I. Rodale, who was the editor of Prevention Magazine. And he wrote this book in 1962. Let me get my cheaters on. The slow death of the Salk vaccine. Scientific experts reveal the Salk vaccine hoax. You never read about this in any book in your school. Data handled in a misleading way. Effectiveness is unknown or greatly overrated, which I can tell you was only an estimate by the 54 field trial report. The criteria of diagnosis was changed in 1954. There was a new form of diagnosis. Manufacturing methods deficient. Potence varies astronomically. Live virus is found, which you now know there isn't any such thing as a live virus. Safety testing inadequate. Public owes gratitude to panelists and journal. But this was in 1962. No major newspaper, news media ever reported any of this stuff. Okay, let me get this big mother up here. This is a copy of the evaluation of the 1954 field trial of poliomyelitis vaccine by Thomas Francis Jr., the official report. On April 12, 1955, Tommy Francis Jr. told the media, the whole world, that the Salk vaccine was effective in preventing 80 to 90% of paralytic polio. That's what he told the world, and that's what the world believed. But in his official report, that ain't what he said. Hang on a minute. This is a ball buster right here. Let's see if you can read it yourself, then I'll read it to you. The purpose of the field trial was not to prove that the vaccine was protective, but rather to measure the effect, if any, of an untried product. They lied out of their teeth, which I'm going to prove to you as I go down the line with this stuff. But then it gets worse. I'll put this up here and see if you can read it. This thing is heavy. It's about 500 pages. Well, I've got underlined right there. Okay, I'll read it now. Obviously, it is difficult or impossible to say with certainty that a given illness, disease, disability, or death is or is not related to vaccination. The fraud that was committed on this is unbelievable. It's incredible. And it's still believed to this day. But the reason they get away with this crap is because there's no machine in the world that they can hook up to the human body and track that poison through the system to detect where it goes, what location it lands on, what brain cells or what tissue cells, and see the destruction of what this poison stuff causes. And now, these are polio books written by the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, aka March of Dimes, that I've got a few of them here that I'm going to read a sentence or two out of each one to show you the amount of fraud that was committed. First book is from the United States Public Health Service, written in 1916. The electron microscope didn't come out till the 1930s. I'm just going to read one paragraph. In the human body, the virus has been found in the tissues and secretions of persons dead of polio, namely in the brain, the spinal cord, the mesenteric glands, the tonsils, secretions, and the intestines. It is the secretions of persons acutely ill with polio, namely in the nasal, I can't pronounce this word, pharyngeal, P-H-A-R-Y-N-G-E-A-L, secretions and in washings from the rectum. Now this book goes on in detail about all this subterfuge and deception. Now the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis wrote this annual report in 1942. See? And here's what they say. At least it has been so purified that material obtained from the brains and spinal cords of animals dying of infantile paralysis could be diluted many millions of times and still produce typical infection when injected into susceptible animals. You got to understand something. Animals didn't get polio naturally. Only when they got injected in the laboratory did they get artificial polio. But this is how they got away with brainwashing everybody. One of the ways. Basil O'Connor from the National Foundation, the president, gave money through Tom Rivers, gave money to all the universities in the country to set up a virus shop. And the way he did that, he told them, can we set up a virus shop? We'll pay you so much money for it, but with the condition our men run it. The university people said, fine. Just going to read some of these. University School of Medicine, New Haven, Connecticut, $16,000. Which was a lot of money in those days. University of Minnesota, $10,000. Children's Hospital, Cincinnati, $12,000. I could go on and on and on, but they list all these universities that they infiltrated. But that's enough. I'm going to get on to the next book. I got a lot of materials to cover. Now here's a book from the National Foundation of Infantile. All these books are from the National Foundation, so I'm not going to mention any of them. Doctor, what can I do? July of 1942, they wrote this. And here's what they said. Cause of the disease. The virus which causes infantile paralysis is a form of germ too small to be seen even under the most powerful microscope. Now you notice they use the word germ in there. They want to confuse people with germs and viruses, thinking that they're the same thing. It will pass through the finest filters, hence it has been frequently called an ultramicroscopic or filterable virus. I'm going to tell you what a filterable virus is in a minute. So now they're talking about filterable viruses. Everybody's talking about filterable viruses. I looked up Martinez-Bejernek, his paper that he wrote in 1897. Okay? It's about 20 pages. You can do it yourself. But I want to tell you what he said about it. This, first of all, is where Thomas Rivers and the boys of today talk about the virus only grows in living cells. This is where that came from. Only the organs of the plant that are growing and whose cells are dividing are capable of being infected. Here only does the virus reproduce itself. Because the plant is young and growing, it's the cells that are reproducing themselves, not the poison they injected into it. I'm going to read another section of Martinez-Bejernek. Weak solutions of formalin mixed with the virus do not destroy it, but they do so lengthen the period of incubation, that the disease cannot become apparent until 6 or more weeks after infection. Think Rivers didn't know about this? Formalin is a very poisonous for the tissues of the tobacco plant, much more so than the virus itself. And the virus they're talking about is ground up tobacco leaves. Okay, I found it. Now, this Martinez-Bejernek, in his experiment with tobacco mosaic disease, by grinding up diseased tobacco leaves into a sap and injecting them into a young plant with living cells, growing cells, is the basis for all the BS that Thomas Rivers and the Rockefeller boys used to deceive the whole world. Now, here's what he says. The quantity of candle filtrate necessary for infection is extremely small. A small drop put into the right place in the plant with a private syringe can infect numerous leaves and branches. If these diseased parts are extracted, an infinite number of healthy plants may be inoculated and infected from the sap, from which we draw the conclusion that the contagium, although fluid, reproduces itself in the living plant. There they are, they're injecting this poison into the plant and claiming they draw the conclusion that the sap attacked the plant instead of poisoning the plant. You understand? Now, there was another guy, Russian guy from Dmitry Ivanovsky. Hang on, I gotta get my... Okay, Dmitry Ivanovsky, a Russian microbiologist doing the same experiments as Bejernek, but unbeknownst to each other, was a little smarter. He went out and talked to the farmers personally, found out what they were doing, found out they were planting the tobacco leaves in the same spot year after year for as long as 40 years. And his common sense prevailed and he said, plant your plants, rotate them, space them. And that was as simple as that. But this is the model that Thomas Rivers used to deceive people and say the virus is virus, meaning Latin from the poison, came alive and caused natural disease. They lied out of their teeth. Now this book is the annual 1947 book published by the National Foundation, and it shows more universities that they set up virus shops in and granted them money to carry on this deception. I'm not going to read these to you because there's too many. But there's 2 pages full, 3 pages full. Grants, more money given out. They dish money out like candy to promote this fraud. Now, we're going to move up to 1949. The National Foundation again wrote a book for doctors called Doctor, What Can I Do? And in this book, it says, cause of the disease. The virus which causes infantile paralysis is a form of organism too small to be seen even under the most powerful microscope. Now, they had developed the electron microscope in the 1930s. This was 1942. They're telling you they can't see the thing, but they know it causes disease. Now, this book was written in 1952 by the National Foundation. They didn't miss a trick. A source book for high school students. This is where your parents, your grandparents, got their information from. And it says, infantile paralysis is caused by a special type of infectious agent called a virus. A virus is somewhat different from a bacterium in that it is smaller and will not grow on ordinary culture media, upon which bacteria grow. See, they're separating virus and bacteria. It must have a living plant or animal as a host, or a special medium known as a tissue culture. Other diseases caused by viruses that are more familiar are chickenpox, smallpox, measles, mumps, and influenza. The virus of infantile paralysis is one of the smallest known. Its size has been estimated at approximately 10 to 15 1/millionth of a millimeter. That means it would take 2 to 3 million to equal 1 inch on your ruler. It will pass through a filter fine enough to separate all the bacteria, and is classed therefore among the filterable viruses. That's Martinez-Bazurnik they're talking about. He's a filterable virus. After a while, the scientists all knew what they meant by filterable viruses. They dropped the word filterable and just used the word viruses, which, by the way, is from the Latin and means poison, like in snake venom. This is a beautiful admission of the fraud. This book is Handbook of Infantile Paralysis by Good Housekeeping, who got all their information from Tommy Rivers and the boys. But listen to what he says. 1954, this book was written. Polio is caused by a virus, an organism so small that probably it has never been seen even through the electron microscope. In 1954, they did the field trial, and they've still never seen a virus. The only proven source of the virus of infantile paralysis are the nose, throat, and bowel discharges of an infected person. They're talking about the result of disease. This is isopathy. We'll get into that later. Story behind the polio vaccination, 1955, National Foundation. This is crazy. It was known that the cause of the disease was a virus. Almost everything else about polio was extremely cloudy. Scientists were not sure how the virus entered the body nor where it came from. The virus had been found in a good many places. In some insects, in sewage, once in a well in Sweden. I mean, what kind of garbage are they telling people? The average person of 1955 had no access to this information. They were just like putty in their hands. This book, written by the National Foundation, July of 1955. That's information for physicians on the Salk poliomyelitis vaccine. Now check this out. They did the field trial in 1954, and they admit a total of 113 polio cases with 5 deaths were recognized among nearly 5.5 million individuals within 1 month after injection of polio vaccine. So they're throwing in that 5.5 million like they were protected from something. Just nothing happened to them. But there were a total of 1,013 cases of polio after the vaccine. And my newspaper report, which I'm going to show you after a bit. Here the National Foundation was hard at work, miseducating the entire medical profession. New information for physicians on the Salk polio vaccine. That's 1956, June. Now, I've told you before, they artificially create disease in animals by injecting cortisone, poisons, x-rays into the animal. The animal gets sick, dies, and they cut it open, take out the poison, and use it to make the vaccine. Here is the proof of that. The administration of cortisone to test animals makes them more susceptible to poliomyelitis virus infection, and in fact, to most other kinds of infection. I guess so, they just poisoned the poor rabbit or mouse or whatever it was. Now the granddaddy of all books that woke me up. Viral Infections of Man, edited by Thomas Rivers. Thomas Rivers was head of the Rockefeller Virus Laboratory, and he was asked to join by Basil O'Connor to the National Foundation in 1938. Rivers controlled everything and everybody in all the money pockets. I'm going to read something that he says in the opening paragraph. I'm just going to read the preface here, written by Thomas Rivers, MD, racketeer. There is a need for a book on viral infections of man to which medical students and practicing physicians may turn for information. Knowledge concerning these infections has developed so rapidly during the past 2 decades that any book written during that time would have been out of date before publication. Furthermore, ideas about infectious agents responsible for these diseases were in such a state of flux that any book written by a number of authors would have confused those not actively working with them. Within the past few years, there has been considerable stabilization of knowledge and ideas, and it is now time that these be brought together in such a way that interested people not actively engaged in study of viral infections may have easy access to them. Bacterial infections of man are discussed in a companion volume. It would be impossible for one person to write authoritatively about all the diseases and their causal agents discussed in this book. Consequently, experts in the different fields have been chosen to participate in a cooperative venture. At first, it seemed not unlikely that there might be many different opinions recorded by various authors, but this has not occurred, indicating that much of the information presented is basic and will not have to be altered. Viruses are obligate parasites and multiply only in susceptible cells of a living host or in a living cells in tissue cultures. You see how he promoted that crap from Bejernik? To publish a book of this nature cost a great deal, and without subsidy it would be available to only a limited number of people. The National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis has provided financial aid for the preparation and publication of the volume, so that its price should not be a factor limiting the number of people who read it. The editor has had splendid cooperation from all the contributors and from the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, for which he expresses deepest appreciation. Thomas Rivers. Can you see that? He got all his buddies from the Rockefeller and the ones that were involved in the hoax to each do a chapter on a different disease and start out by saying it was caused by a virus. Biggest hoax ever perpetrated by the medical profession. Certain people in it. And now, more research that I've got, the actual transcripts of the players who pulled off this hoax. I'm just going to read a couple of sentences or a paragraph out of each one to show you what they were doing. The first one is Simon Flexner, MD, and Harold A. Moss. Flexner is credited with transferring the first case of polio from a man to a monkey. They just didn't bother to tell you how he did it. So I'm going to tell you how he did it. In his own words. In 1909, Simon Flexner and Paul Lewis cut out the spinal cord of a child who died of infantile paralysis. They put the child's spinal cord in a salt solution and turned it into a liquid. Then they cut a hole in the head of a monkey and injected the liquid spinal cord into the brain of a monkey. The monkey became paralyzed. You know, I read this stuff, I get so angry. It's just incredible the way they pull this crap off. Oh, in case I didn't show you the paper, in their own words, transcript. This one is by the infamous John Enders. John Enders was said to grow the polio virus. In a minute, I'm going to tell you what he did. This is a cultivation paper that John Enders wrote. I've made some notes on this so I don't have to go through the whole thing. John Enders, for the direct isolation and tissue culture of poliomyelitis from stools of patients, a 10% suspension of feces in saline was prepared. After the addition of 100 units of penicillin, the suspension was centrifuged for 30 minutes. White mice and monkeys have been inoculated intracerebrally with materials from tissue cultures in order to demonstrate the presence or absence of the virus. Then they kill the animal, dissect to find the virus, or check its stool. They're making vaccines out of shit. The cytopathogenic effect of the virus by anti-serum is important because it affords conclusive evidence that the virus is directly or indirectly responsible for the injury observed. The mixing of cells and poison. The observed injury is the damage or death done to the cells by the poison. The observed injury is the lesion. So they inject poison into the animal, they dissect it and kill it, and they look for lesions, wounds, and claim that it was attacked by the virus. Experimental animals have been shown to be associated with the development of high concentration of virus. The conclusion is inescapable that the nerve cell lesions are the result of virus multiplication. Again, what I just said. You're looking at the wounds and claiming that the wounds were caused by a living virus when it was in fact caused by poisoning the cells. Here's a paper by our Lion Tommy Francis Jr. of the University of Michigan. I'm going to read to you what he said about virus. 16 swine have been inoculated intranasally with mixtures of human influenza virus, that's snot, and the bacterium H, whatever they call it. These animals were included in 2 serial passage experiments. One series started with virus from infected ferret lung, that's the snot of an infected ferret lung that they made infected in the first place, was continued for 5 passages, and the other initiated with virus from infected mouse lung, was carried through 3 passages in swine before being discontinued. These lies just, I have nothing to say. This next deceiver was Hillary Kaprowski, the man who fed the first live virus to a human being. Some years ago, before he died, I saw a telephone number with his name on it. I thought he was already dead. So I called the number up and the lady said, "Dr. Kaprowski's office, may I help you?" I said, "I thought the man was already dead." She said, "No, he's not. Would you like to talk to him?" I said, "You betcha." Well, he couldn't come to the phone. So we had a series of emails back and forth where he finally sent me his original paper. Just want to show you these so you know I'm not BSing you. We had correspondence for quite a while before he sent me the original papers. And here's a paper from Arlen Specter, was a politician, praising Hillary Kaprowski for his work. I'm going to show you what he praised him at. This is the actual paper here that he sent me. And here's what he said. The first live virus was fed to a human on February the 27th, 1950, with aliquots of a suspension of cotton rat brain and spinal cord infected with a strain. Material used for human feedings were prepared in the following way. Adult cotton rats were injected cerebrally, however you pronounce that, with viable suspensions of virus. After showing signs of paralysis, the animals were sacrificed by euthanizing, and their brain and spinal cord were removed aseptically. A 20% tissue suspension by weight was prepared in a Waring blender with 5% aqueous dextrose used as diluent. The material was then distributed in glass samples which were flame sealed and immersed in alcohol mixture until frozen. Samples were stored until used. After thawing, the infectious material was transferred onto a tablespoon and fed to the volunteers either directly or suspended in half a glass of either chocolate milk or corn syrup. This is what they're claiming causes disease. Yeah, it is when you inject it into your body. And here's a report by our infamous Thomas Rivers, MD, head of the virus research for Rockefeller and head of the National Foundation Virus Research. I told you I actually bought his book on eBay. There's a copy of it. And I downloaded this report. I'm going to read to you what he said. In all fields of work, times come when one must stop and take thought. New facts, new ideas, and new suggestions alter lines of endeavor in every field of research. We are here today for the purpose of taking thought concerning the knowledge of the so-called filterable viruses, that's Major Neck, and the diseases caused by them, that he just made up. I have been asked to give a critique of this knowledge. It is quite obvious that I shall be unable within an hour to analyze thoroughly and to criticize authoritatively all the work in this field. Therefore, I shall review quickly some facts and ideas concerning this group of diseases as a whole, and then discuss a few reports concerning several of its individual members. In Table 1, are listed most of the diseases which are included by different observers in the group under discussion. The etiological agents concerned in these diseases or groups of them have been given a variety of names. Filterable viruses, invisible microbes, ultramicroscopic viruses, protista, microplasms, strongoplasms. A superficial examination alone is convincing that none of these names is applicable to all of the etiological agents. Names, however, facilitate the interchange of facts and ideas between individuals. For practical purposes, then, the term filterable virus, mainly because of its wide usage, is as satisfactory as any name suggested. Throughout this discussion, the term filterable viruses will be employed in a non-committal way to designate certain active transmissible agents which are capable of producing pathological conditions in bacteria, plants, insects, fish, birds, and mammals, and which by general consent are more or less limited for the moment to etiological agents of the diseases listed in the table. Here I'm going to list just some of the diseases that he claims are caused by viruses. Swine pox, goat pox, sheep pox, horse pox, cow pox, smallpox, varioid, chicken pox, herpes zoster, Japanese 1924, Australian disease. Anyway, in my book, The Anti-Vaccinators Bible, I list every one of these guys so you can download their reports yourself and have the final proof. The last one I'm going to do on this is by Wendell Stanley, who I'm ashamed to admit was born in Ridgeville, Indiana. He went to work for the Rockefeller Institute in 1931, Rockefeller boy. 1958, he became professor of virology. Virology means the study of poison. V-I-R-O, poison, study, O-L-O-G-Y, study of poison. That's what they were doing. He demonstrated that an infectious agent could possess some of the properties of a chemical molecule. You can't even see a molecule. Stanley concluded, tobacco mosaic virus is regarded as an autocatalytic self-reproducing protein which, where present, may be assumed to require the presence of living cells for multiplication. And you know, he got that from Tommy Rivers. Says he isolated the virus and then showed that it contained protein and nucleic acid. Says proved that the virus activity was function of the nucleic acid. And I questioned myself how and so forth and so on. But let's see what else, if I got something else here to do. 1935, Stanley had crystallized tobacco mosaic virus. Crystallizing, it means they took the diseased plant, ground it up into a sap, spun it around in a centrifuge machine until it crystallized itself. What does that mean? And he's given rewards and all kinds of allocates for that. Tobacco mosaic virus is regarded as an autocatalytic self-reproducing protein for which the present may be assumed to require the presence of living cells for multiplication. Okay, that's it for those guys. Now, when I got all this information, I've spent a ton of money and more time putting all this stuff together, and I threw a bunch of these guys away because I'm downsizing everything. These are the ones that I kept. But I wanted to go and find out what the media told the American people, your parents and grandparents and mine, about polio and the virus. So I got back on eBay again, and I bought some magazines from the 1950s on the stories of polio. You're going to love this. I just want to show you, when I do research, some people double check stuff. I 100 times check it. These are just some of the magazines that I bought on eBay about polio. But I've got a bunch more. I'm going to read a little bit from each one. I'm not going to do these in any particular order. This is Harper's Magazine, March 31, 1951. Says, "The Virus Diseases by Howard A. Howe, MD." Fake news. Unlike bacteria, viruses are parasites within cells. Since they are for the most part invisible with ordinary microscopes, it has required the modern electron microscope to confirm this fact visually. Nevertheless, it has long been recognized that even a few minutes after certain viruses have been brought into contact with susceptible cells, they always use the word susceptible, it is impossible by any known means to disassociate this unholy union. The virus exerts its lethal effect by entering the cell and diverting its life processes to the production of more virus. This does not always result in the death of the cell, since some viruses actually stimulate cell division, and it has a not uncommon phenomena that many viruses which cause rare or even fatal infections in man may be harmless, fellow travelers in other animal species. Only in very recent years have some of the animal viruses been obtained in relatively pure form and observed with the electron microscope, which you know, or should know, only sees dead stuff, and that's dead poison that they're looking at. Now they're brainwashing your parents and grandparents. Among the commonest virus diseases of man are measles, mumps, fever, blisters, shingles, the common cold, warts, just to start with the mild ones, polio, smallpox, influenza, German measles. They go on and on and on and on. They talk about drugs, antibodies, and they bring in the antibody bull crap because they have to do that. This magazine is Wisdom Magazine, where you only get wise stuff from the experts. 1956. This book shows you how they only get these media people, magazine people, only get their information from the criminals and the liars and the deceivers. He says, in his fight against polio, Salk has constantly referred to the contributions in the field of immunology made by such outstanding investigators as Carl Landsteiner, Dr. Edwin Popper, Dr. John Enders, Thomas Waller, Frederick C. Robbins of Harvard, Howard Howe, Isabel Morgan, John Hopkins. All the time, the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis was generous in its donation of funds for his work. See, they're only reporting what they're told by these people. And the American people had no way to check anything. There was no internet. There was no nothing. They just believed it or they didn't, but they went on and pulled off this greatest medical fraud ever. Here's the Post magazine, Saturday Evening Post, of September of 1955. It says, where are we now on polio? Yeah. They got a picture there of Eisenhower was president. In 1955, when they had what was fakely called the Cutter incident, where 260 kids got paralyzed and 10 of them died, Olivia Kolpabbe, the secretary of whatever it was told by President Eisenhower, I don't want to hear of another case of polio coming out from the vaccines. So what do you think happened? That channel of information got cut off. He didn't hear anymore. But here is what they said when somebody got sick or died from the vaccine. Dr. Wyatt expressed the concern one feels for a child stricken with infantile paralysis, but he was not alarmed. She must have been exposed before the vaccination, he said. There wasn't little enough for the vaccine to protect her. But I'm glad you called. We'll keep a close watch on things. These are the excuses they made. But this is the newspaper people reporting what they were told, and by ignorant doctors. This is a good one. Saturday Evening Post, October the 10th of 1959. And shows here Dr. Alfonso Dochez. And he says, a pioneer in the field of cold virus research in 1950, he became the first to succeed in making an animal, a chimpanzee, catch cold. Well, you know me, I research. I looked up Dochez, Alfonso Dochez. You know what he did? He took people that had colds and took their snot and injected it into the brains of chimpanzees, and they come down with colds. They don't tell you that in these books. The era of new viruses. How teams of virologists are uncovering some startling secrets about infectious diseases, including that most baffling infection of all, the common cold, by Greer Williams. They just hit them heavy with miseducating the entire medical profession in the world. This is Collier's magazine, August of 1956. August of 1956, I was 14 years old, 15 years old. And he talks about our friend from Ridgeville, Indiana, Wendell Stanley. The cylinders in the background of page at the left are the tobacco mosaic viruses. That's your infection of your disease leaves, which were man-made. They were produced at the University of California Virus Laboratory and photographed by electron microscope. Dr. Wendell Stanley, director of the lab, holds enough polio virus to infect 10 billion people. Oh, they scare the hell out of you, don't they? A historic 5 minutes put within man's power the two chemicals which contain life's spark. They're trying to tell the people of America that this virus, this poison, is the life, spark of life, created life. Are they nuts? I'm not going to read this to you, but it's all in there. You can probably get some of these on eBay if you check long enough. This is Life magazine, February 22nd, 1954. How polio vaccine was found, a great medical detective story. Yeah. Tracking the killer. Production of a new polio vaccine brings a great medical mystery drama with a cast of thousands up to its climatic act, by Robert Coughlin. Now, let's see what I want to see in here. Now, I'm going to give you some more nonsense that they come out with. Tracking the killer. It was Robert Koch and Louis Pasteur who in the 1880s showed that infections are caused by bacteria, commonly known as germs, which are in perpetual assault on the body. See, they're always promoting germ theory too. That's why people believe in that crap. Occasionally under conditions which make the body susceptible, there's your word susceptible again, they cause active infection and the individual may sicken and die. But ordinarily he does not, because the invading germs and substances which they produce stimulate the body to manufacture tiny chemical entities called antibodies. And antibodies don't exist either, as you should know by now. When they said the viruses capture the cell and reproduce and reproduce and reproduce, they had to answer the question, well, if the viruses keep reproducing, they'd kill you. So they had to come up with something, so they come up with antibody and claim the antibody goes in and attacks the virus, which is attacking the cell. For anybody that's new to this, go to your doctor and ask him to take some of your blood and let you see an antibody attacking the virus, attacking the cell. It doesn't happen because it's all a lie. For each kind of germ, there is a corresponding antibody specifically designed to deal with it. A vaccine consists of germs, now they're saying germs instead of viruses, which have been so weakened or killed that they can no longer cause damage, but which still can stimulate the body into pouring out antibodies. Vaccination has the same practical effect as a mild case of the disease. I got Dr. John Enders in there, that lying son of a bitch. Yeah, I got one more. I forgot about it. They got so many books. This is Saturday Evening Post, July 23rd, 1960. Oral vaccine for polio better than Salk shots. What a lot of people don't know is they stopped using Salk's vaccine in 1960. Not because it wiped out polio, but because it caused so much polio, disease and disability. And then they brought in Sabin's sugar pill when he went to Russia, and the American people were fed up with Salk's vaccine. He comes back and says, oh, I just gave my candy-flavored candy to millions of Russians and I prevented polio from everybody, and the race was on again. Says oral polio vaccine, the best yet, question mark. Candy balls or cherry-flavored syrup containing live, tame polio virus appears to be more effective than the Salk shots. I'm not going to go into this stuff because it's all a lie, but this will give you an idea, it'll give you proof of what polio was, how they brainwashed the American people, because these reporters didn't do any investigative reporting. They just wrote down what they were told to write down. And the American people had no choice but to believe it or not believe it and go on with their life. Journalism, media is fake news as you know today, but it's always been fake news because these guys were more interested in writing a story that made them look great, puffed up. Look what I did, I wrote this story on polio. And they got all their information from the National Foundation, Tommy Rivers, Tommy Francis, Jonas Salk, John Enders, Hillary Kaprowski, and a whole bunch more of criminals. Today we got Fossey as a criminal, and this Plotkin guy, Stanley, and Dr. Paul Offit, which I got a surprise for you coming up here in the next few months on Offit. So anyway, I was going to do this and the smallpox, but it's too much, and everything about smallpox is in my book, The Anti-Vaccinators Bible, A Conspiracy Exposed, with the links to all those guys to their actual transcripts. You can get this stuff, take a few days, few weeks to study it, and you can know what I know, and you'll fear nobody. I don't fear any doctor, because I know they're all full of bullshit, quite frankly. That's why I can wear these shirts. I can take on anybody that is stupid enough to take me on. And you can do the same thing if you put in the effort. So I think my mind is so cluttered with all this stuff, I jump from one subject to another. I think that's all I've got on this stuff, but that's the most important stuff on polio, because polio was considered the mother of all vaccines, wiping out polio, and led the door open to say they wiped out all this other crap, and it was all bullshit. So anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you watch it as many times as you need to. I hope you order my book, because my book is the only book in the world that's got all these facts and all this information. An Anti-Vaccinators Bible, A Conspiracy Exposed. It's on Amazon. And if you don't like Amazon, I didn't know anything about Amazon. I don't like it either. But get the book. Don't cut off your nose to spite your face. So that's it. This is Jim Dandy O'Kelly, out.